All right, the Biden administration's interpretation of the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act will allow them to deny federal funding for schools with hunting or archery classes. The change will, of course, end schools having those classes because everyone needs the federal funding. I want to welcome to the show John Lott. He is president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. And John, you recently wrote an op-ed about this particular issue.
Right.
So tell us about it, and tell the viewers what they need to know about this move by the Biden administration, the Biden regime.
Well, obviously, archery attacks are something that we're seeing constantly every day in the news.
Katniss Everdeen tears it up. That's crazy.
The assault bows are the worst, honestly.
And of course, what better way to improve safety than to get rid of hunter safety classes? That seems like an obvious thing, too.
Right.
So it kind of fits in with the community safety part of that.
Yeah.
So, look, the Biden administration's been having pretty much a war on all sorts of aspects of guns and hunting. I mean, this is not the only thing that they've done. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned, about 9% of funding for public schools in the United States comes from the federal government. So you threaten to take away 9%. Mm-hmm. My guess is there are going to be no schools that are going to keep these types of programs. And kind of the amazing thing to me is you have people like John Tester from Montana. That's a pretty big hunting state that's there. Yeah. He voted for it. In fact, all the Democrats in the Senate and the House voted for this. Joe Manchin voted. And then you have people like Angus King from Maine, another big hunting state, which supported this too. So
they're saying it makes it safer if they don't get
the thing is, I don't even know what the argument is for the archery, but for the hunter safety is they just view this as kind of a gateway to people getting guns generally. And it'd be better for people not to get guns. And if you don't get the hunter safety training, then you can't get your hunter license. And so it's just better to, I think they're becoming more and more obvious that their end goal is just to have people not have guns per se. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, look, they're doing all sorts of other things. They're going to ban lead bullets for anything in national parks for any type of hunting. It just came out recently that the Biden administration over the first 2 years has put a couple thousand gun dealers out of business with their zero tolerance policy that's there. Wow. I don't know, maybe we ought to have a policy that if a government agency makes a paperwork mistake, no matter how tiny, no matter how inconsequential, the government agency should be out of business too.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Let's do that.
I mean, if you could look over 15 years of an agency's paperwork, how many government agencies could say we have not made one paperwork mistake over the last 15 years?
Right. So you mentioned that, they must think that if people not having guns will make them more safe. I have a feeling the work that you do, you would argue that that's not the case.
Right. Well, I mean, look, one of the claims that's often being made by the Biden administration and everybody else is that, guns are the number one killer of children. There are lots of problems with the numbers that they have, but what they're implicitly assuming that if we just get rid of guns, then these lives will be saved. Mm-hmm. You look at a couple of the components there. You look at suicides, for example. We've tried banning guns in some places, Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And it's true you've seen drops in firearm suicides afterwards. Mm. But what's happened to total suicides? There's been no change in total suicides when they've done that. Mm-hmm. It's just people switch into other ways of doing it. Right. You look at murder. Washington, D.C. and Chicago, when they banned handguns, murders increased. In fact, every place in the world that we've either banned all guns or all handguns, every single time murders have gone up. You think if guns really on net are bad, it should be easy to find places where murder rates went down or at least stayed the same. And even out of randomness, you'd think you'd find one or two places went down, but yet every single time in the world that we've banned either all guns or all handguns, murder rates have gone up. And there's a simple reason for that. And this applies to gun control laws generally, and that is who obeys these laws? If I go and I ban guns, who are the people who are most likely to turn in their guns? And it tends to be the most law-abiding, good citizens. And You may take a few guns away from criminals, but if you're primarily disarming the victims there, you make it relatively easier for criminals to go and commit crimes, and you see increases in deaths. There are other problems that we can talk about with their numbers, but even if you take their numbers at face value, the way they want to do it, motor vehicle deaths are greater. And, it's just, and if you look at murders rather than homicides, because homicides include murders plus justifiable homicides, and it's not really obvious to me why a woman who fatally shoots a rapist or a murderer who breaks into her home at 2 a.m. in the morning should be classified as a bad thing necessarily that happens. So if you just look at murders, then suffocations are clearly greater in all these recent years than gun deaths are.
Do you think, I see the Biden administration always throw around the national emergency. Let's declare a national emergency over this, or a national health emergency over climate, or whatever. Do you think that they would ever do a national health emergency over gun violence?
Oh, sure. I have no problem believing that. It's you just look at the rhetoric. You look at the way they've looked at these things. You take something like this pistol brace ban that they just had. First of all, I don't even know if most people know what a pistol brace is, but it's essentially a strap that fits around the gun. It was designed and approved, of all places, by the Obama administration, where you had veterans who may have lost part of their hand in combat or may be partially paralyzed. And the whole point of the strap is allowing them to hold onto the gun despite the recoil that's there. Because if you are partially paralyzed, they just couldn't hold on to it with the recoil. So, they point to the fact that there was this Buffalo mass murderer who used a pistol brace. But there's no discussion. Was he disabled? Did it allow him to hold the gun when he couldn't do it otherwise? Had no effect on anything. They don't make any claim that it made it easier for him to go and kill people. So there's no serious cost benefit. You have millions of disabled people who are able to use a gun defensively because of pistol braces, okay? You're making it illegal for them to be able to go and do that. There's no discussions. Well, how many people now aren't going to be able to defend themselves versus crimes that you're saying? It's not like we have a lot of disabled people going out and committing crimes all of a sudden that we weren't having previously. And so I just see things like that come down. But, you look at things like the Bruin decision last year, the Democrats, Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan, they refused to recognize that there's an individual right to self-defense, let alone an individual right to self-defense with a gun. I think, you have Gabby Giffords a couple months ago. She had an interview with Time magazine, where at the end of the interview, they asked her, what's your goal? What do you want to achieve with what you're pushing? She says her goal was to get rid of all guns. And the Time magazine host asked her, just to be sure, are you really saying all guns? And she said, yeah, I want to get rid of all guns. I want to ban all guns. And then her aide chimed in and said, well, look at Australia. They banned all guns, and how great it is there. Well, first of all, they didn't ban all guns. They bought about 25% of the guns in the buyback, but then people were able to go and buy guns. And by 2010, the gun ownership rate in Australia was above what it was before the buyback. And so, it just, but, the point is, and I can give you other people recently who, you look at these things, they can't ever say anything positive about people having guns for defense. And the weird thing is we're in this world right now where Democrats have supported cutting funds for police. They support district attorneys who refuse to prosecute violent criminals. They support liberal judges who over the last few years have released half and even 2/3 of the inmates from local jails. They've supported things like this bail reform. You just had a case in Detroit a few weeks ago where a man murdered 3 people. He was released on essentially just having to put up $1,000 in bail. And then he murdered somebody else. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, he's already facing 3 life sentences. Right. What's the penalty that does he have a 4th life that he can forfeit for doing this? Right. But the thing is, they're making it so law enforcement can't do its job, but these same people want to make it so that private citizens aren't able to go and defend themselves either.
It's like they want us to be helpless.
Absolutely.
I just don't get the appeal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I can't help but to think
word.
when we tried to ban alcohol, prohibition, did that work?
Right.
No.
So why do they think this is going to work? Like you just said, it's just going to put the guns in the hands of the ones that don't abide the law. And they're still going to get it.
Well, look at Mexico.
Last word, real quick.
Since 1972, Mexico's had one gun store in the country. The most powerful gun you've been able to buy is a .22 caliber short round bolt action rifle. Murder rate in Mexico has more than doubled since then. In recent years, they've had a murder rate that's 6 times higher than the murder rate in the United States.
Wow.
The drug gangs aren't fighting with bolt action rifles.
Right.
And they're bringing in weapons from around the world, just as they bring in the drugs from around the world. And if I could click my fingers and cause all guns in the United States to disappear and all illegal drugs, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs started coming back in? 20 minutes if you live in El Paso?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly right.
it's not like a drug gang can go to the police and say, this other gang stole our drugs, can you help us get them back?
Right.
They have to set up their own little militaries in order to protect that valuable property, and they'd bring in the guns at the same time they bring in the drugs.
Yeah. John, I appreciate you being here. Will you come back?
I'd be thrilled, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the great work you do. All right, we've got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.